Let's bring into the conversation, though, our friend, retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and co-host of the Strat podcast. I'm talking about Hal Kempfer, and he joins me. Hal, thanks for being with us here. Good to see you. We were speaking at this time last night about all of these developments here, kind of in the run-up to Secretary of Defense Austin's meetings with some of his Israeli counterparts, including Bibi Netanyahu, including the Israeli Defense Minister, Hal Yoav Gallant. Apparently, according to Reuters, according to some of the reporting out of some of these meetings, Israel will gradually transition to the next phase of operations in Gaza, according to Yoav Gallant there. And so even Lloyd Austin saying that the lower intensity combat phase from the high-intensity combat phase was a part of these discussions. And so it seems like, Hal, that Israeli officials listened to U.S. officials about their suggestion to move to this lower-intensity phase, to have more surgical, precise strikes on targets there, Hamas ones in Gaza here. So what did you make of this? It seemed like the Israelis heard what Austin was saying.
Andrew, I think they heard exactly what Secretary Austin was saying. I also think this was also something that was communicated through other channels, probably from President Biden. I wouldn't be surprised. I think he said enough publicly that I think it was pretty clear where he was going, that they needed to transition. And also, I'm sure there was a lot of intelligence on the ground of what was showing on the ground, working with the Israelis, looking at specific locations and saying, look, this is where you need to transition to. One thing the U.S. does understand very well, I would say better than anybody else in the world, is how to transition from major combat operations to lower intensity operations. We have done that a lot, especially in the last 20, 30 years. We understand that concept. And that's something that we can bring to Israel. I'm not saying Israel doesn't have a lot of warfighting experience, but with something akin to what they're doing there, this is a little bit different than what they've done in a very long time. Not that different, though, from what the U.S. has had to do in, say, places like Iraq, and if you want to go back to Desert Storm, this very similar sort of thing. So we're able to work with them, talk about targeting in a way that you're not causing as many collateral effects, if you will. In other words, not killing as many civilians with your ordnance. And the problem is they're using these big airstrikes with heavy ordnance, and even as precise as they are big explosive devices, and They do cause a lot of collateral damage, and that's what we're talking to them about.
Okay, because, and we've now shown the joint press conference between Austin and Gallant here, and Austin was quite, forthcoming and transparent and just kind of direct, and he said no, that, essentially Israel is doing this on their own timeline. He went out of his way, Hal, it seems, to kind of counteract some of that narrative that was out there last week about, and some of those reports that were out there about U.S. officials, urging Israel to kind of wrap this up in the next couple of weeks. And so Austin kind of went out of his way to tamp that down. Did you hear that?
I heard it very clearly. And actually, it was kind of giving them a little bit of, they have to address their domestic audience. They have to address their base. We understand that. There is a domestic political dimension to this within Israel. I mean, October 7th was for Israel almost a combination of December 7th, Pearl Harbor, if you will, and 9/11. And so it's had a huge traumatic impact on the body politic in Israel. And they don't, certainly the Netanyahu administration doesn't want to look like it's, buckling down to international pressure. To put the mission first, eliminate Hamas, eliminate this persistent, threat, if you will. And the U.S. agrees with that. There's a lot of countries in the world that don't agree with that particular strategy, but the U.S. does agree with it. But with that said, what I heard was that they are getting ready to transition. I don't know if that will be days. I don't know if it'll be in a week or so. But one of the big telling factors was a report today that they are getting ready to start moving Gaza residents, Palestinian civilians in Gaza, back to the north, and they're doing the work necessary to do that. You and I had talked about this early into this war, that at some point when they moved everybody south, in order to engage in military operations in the South, they're going to have to move the civilian population somewhere else, and that somewhere else will probably be back north. And it sounds like what they're saying today is they're actually getting ready to do that.
Sorry, there, my microphone was down. But Hal, when you talk about moving Gazan civilians back to the north where they were displaced, and correct me if I'm wrong here, frankly, there's not much left there in northern Gaza after the Israeli campaign here. So isn't that going to create a whole host of humanitarian issues yet again in the north that were somewhat displaced to the south? We're just kind of flipping it here?
I think we're going to have a discussion. And I think the discussion is, do you have tents? Do you have all these other facilities you're going to need to build these refugee camps to the north? And that's something that Israel's going to have to be prepared to do. That may be something that we were discussing. As you may recall, there's been discussion with the Saudis, with the Kuwaitis, with others as far as what to do there. And there may be a larger regional solution in going into this in terms of setting up some sort of situation for the refugees that they can be better cared for when they move back north. But at some point, in order to really clear the South, they've got to get the civilians out of the way. And with Hamas being fully embedded in the civilian infrastructure and its civilian sites, there really isn't, there's nowhere else to go. You can't go further south. The Egyptians have made it very clear that they're not going to take Palestinian refugees. So you're going to have to move them internally within the Gaza Strip, which means you're going to have to move them back north at some point. And that's kind of what they were indicating they're planning on doing today. How they will do that, where they will put them, you know, I would say that on an international level, the situation now with the huge problems they're having in getting aid, water, food, sanitation, you know, there's estimated to be 360,000 Gazans who are very sick with things like cholera and other deadly diseases tied to the lack of hygienic situation there, and of course being exposed to the environment. They're going to have to do something about that, and that's something that I'm sure is part of the planning process. And I have no doubt that that's something that the U.S. is talking to Israel about. And again, that's something where the U.S. has a lot of knowledge and understanding because of all the things we've done over the years.
Yeah, Hal, I want to talk about just briefly here the hostage question. So you have that, what we just spoke about, because it's hard to kind of make sense of, you know, where the ground offensive, you know, is going, because what we were just discussing, you know, the fact that some of these innocent Gazan civilians might have to be, you know, transported back to northern Gaza in some capacity so Israel can carry out its campaign there in the south. So that's an interesting element of where the war is going. But also the hostage negotiations seem to be picking back up piecemeal day by day by day here. You have this report, CIA Director Bill Burns and some of these other partners, like from Israel, like from Qatar, meeting in Warsaw soon to discuss kind of jump-starting those back up again. That's a good sign, is it not? Are you bullish on that front?
I don't know if the term bullish, but I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to get something done. I don't know what that will look like. I mean, there's a lot of different forces that pull against this. You know, part of it is they don't want to, you know, the Israelis don't want to call a ceasefire that's going to hinder their ability to destroy Hamas. On the other hand, they want to get the hostages back, and it really depends on. And I think I heard more than one Israeli official say this. Depends on the situation on the ground, and they're going to be looking very closely at where they are on the ground to see if it is a place where they can do some sort of operational pause, if you will, temporary ceasefire, if you want to call it a truce, whatever, in order to get more hostages back. What that will look like, but one thing is, with Israel putting out that video today of the 3 elderly Israeli men who are hostages, Israel does not want to look like they're buckling into or buckling down to accept Hamas propaganda, if you will. They want to be very careful about that, and so they want to make sure whatever the timing looks like, they are going to weigh that with the political influences within Israel to make sure they're not looking like they're basically being pressured into doing something that is operationally a bad idea. And so that's what they're doing. But there is a tremendous amount of pressure on Netanyahu and others to try and find some way. And the fact that Burns, the head of the CIA, and his Mossad counterpart are both there talking with their Qatari interlocutor says that this thing is moving, moving forward. And so I don't know if I would use the word bullish, but I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to accomplish something.
Yeah, and Hal, I just want to put up this tweet here. You can see you just referenced this. This is from Trey Yanks there in Israel. Hamas released another hostage video tonight. The man in the middle is 79-year-old Chaim Perry. The Nir Oz resident spent his free time driving Palestinian children to hospitals for treatment and making art to protest violence against Palestinians. He is a peace activist there. And then, of course, you have this image there of Austin meeting with Gallant. Austin saying regarding timetable on the Gaza war, this is Israel's operation, and I'm not here to dictate timelines or terms there. Wanted to make sure we got those tweets in as well. Hal, while we have you, we're approaching the bottom of the hour here. We do want to kind of pick your ear as well on the war in Ukraine. Of course, the Ukraine funding fight still playing out there on Capitol Hill as well. And I thought this was a really interesting report today. In Bloomberg, I'm reading it right now, that the Pentagon said it will run out of money to replace weapons sent to Ukraine by December the 30th unless Congress approves new funding, for the first time giving a precise date for when it will have exhausted its cash. And Hal, I think it's really important for the viewers to understand that a lot of what we are sending to Ukraine, yes, appropriated and allocated by Congress, a lot of that money goes to replacing it here domestically in our own stockpiles. Do I have that right? Help me make sense of that.
That is correct. A lot of it, this money is actually primarily going to the U.S. It's money that's going to put arms over there, but it's reinvigorating our rather moribund, if you will, domestic defense industrial base that has not been producing weapons and certainly ammunition at a high level for quite some time. So it's been invigorating that. It's been replenishing our stockpiles of stuff that we've already sent over there. So there's a lot of reasons why this needs to be done. As I understand it right now, in the Senate, they are negotiating, Republicans, Democrats, and certainly at least one independent, on this border asylum initiative, if you will, that is the big requirement for certainly for GOP members to go forward and vote for this. They're really not sounding very optimistic they're going to get this done next week. You know, they're staying in session next week, but they said the mechanics of this are so daunting that they're having a tough time fashioning something they think they will approve. They're thinking that maybe in early January, when both the House and Senate are back in session, they might have something in there. Now, with that said, yes, our funding will end, but that doesn't mean that, Ukraine instantly collapses. And I'm sure we all have this vision in our minds of what happened with the Afghan national government when the U.S. pulled out. They literally the military collapse. That's not going to happen with Ukraine. And there are other offsetting factors. For example, Denmark just pledged another $1 billion that will go in there. So there's other sources of funding, but it does look like they're coming to some sort of compromise, and it may not happen till early January.
Right.
Now, there are things that are underway. The F-16s are coming in. Don't know when they're going to get there, but they're coming in. They're going to hit soon. We're not sure when, but there's a lot of discussion of what that will mean. And this gets into the weeds. But one of the things the Russians have done is they've really built a dependence on these glide bombs, which are kind of like their version of our JDAMs. They fly in, they sit off about 25 miles, and they send these suckers in. Sorry, I'm sounding like somebody in an operations center now. But they send them in, they glide for a long time, and they're very precise, and they hit a target, all right? They're so far out that there really is no way that the Ukrainians could shoot down those aircraft with any efficiency or effectiveness. When the F-16s get in there, the thought is that they will be able to do some air-to-air combat stuff, which will help neutralize or at least dramatically mitigate that particular threat. That will change the battlefield a lot if they can do that. And the F-16s are pretty integral. So even though the U.S. funding hasn't been approved, and certainly we'd all like to see if it was approved before now, if it gets approved in early January and you have those F-16s rolling in there and you have the money from Denmark, and it sounds like they've got some sort of workaround to get around Orban over in the EU, that's another 50 billion euros, that you might suddenly see in probably around mid-January, a very different situation than what we're seeing today.
Yeah, Hal, that's, I think, important to remind myself and our viewers. The United States is not the only funding stream there, supporting and propping up the Ukrainian war effort against Russian aggression. And just reading more from the Bloomberg piece, it says the Defense Department is spending its last $1.07 billion to buy new weapons and equipment that will replace those drawn down from stockpiles and sent to Ukraine. This is according to a letter that Bloomberg obtained from Pentagon Comptroller. His name is Michael McCord. This was a letter dated December the 15th. 15 days later, on the 30th, its accounts will be empty. So you're right. This is definitely going to be kicked into the new year. As always, Hal Kempfer, we do appreciate your insight into all of this, and we'll talk soon.